Welcome to Tough Talk. My name is Paul Taros. I'm your host, and today we're privileged to have Tami Carlone, educational advocate, with us. Welcome, Tami.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Now, you're an education advocate.
That's right, yep.
What does that entail?
Well, I have 2 kids, and they've gone through K through 12 in public schools. And over time, I started to realize some things. You know, I saw some things that weren't quite right. And although I'm a CPA, I saw that action needed to be taken. There's some things in the public schools that, like I said, aren't quite right. And so I wanted to be heard. Started going to school board meetings, bringing issues forward to the principals and the teachers in these things. And it wasn't quite working. So moved it up the ladder to statewide and national level efforts to make positive change in education. I believe in excellence in education for all students.
So what are some of the things you saw that disturbed you or concerned you?
Well, just as a parent, you know, you start to notice, if you're paying attention, you know, some of the things that they're teaching the kids aren't quite right. A good example is American history. You know, the teachers and the curriculum can go one way or the other in the bias, and I noticed the bias was always to the liberal side, some liberal bias. And I just want the truth taught. Everybody's got their opinion or whatever. If there's opinions given, I want both sides shown or all sides shown, so the kids can, you know, be intelligent thinkers. And not brainwashed. So that's an example I noticed pretty much throughout, you know, the end of elementary all the way through high school. And it's getting worse. It was, when I was in public school, it was definitely there, but it's gotten way worse over time.
Okay. Now, you're, as part of your education advocacy, you're the vice president of Stop Common Core in Michigan, is that correct?
That's right, and I'm also part of a national network of education advocates. It's called Truth in American Education. Truth in American Education and Stop Common Core in Michigan both have great websites and Facebook pages if anybody wants to go check them out.
Okay. What is Common Core? I think a lot of people don't know what it is. They've heard the word. It sounds...
Which is a big problem.
Sounds
that a lot of people still don't know what it is.
Right.
It was kind of slid in on people, and once their kids started crying and complaining, and they were like, "What is this?" You know, so people figured out kind of on the back end, which is really unfortunate. But you know, Common Core is part of a takeover in the education system that has a lot of tentacles. You know, Common Core is just one tentacle of everything going on in education. But if you look at it big picture, it all goes together. So the sales pitch for Common Core is that they are higher standards and that everybody is learning, and this is officially it's math and ELA, everybody's learning across the nation the same thing at the same time, you know, in the grades, which isn't true at all. You can't possibly do that. And all kids are different and learn at different rates, so you can't possibly do that. But you know, that's the sales pitch, and that's how it got through. Like a lot of things that get through, you know, they have very great sounding things, but then the reality, when you look under the curtain, isn't exactly what it was meant to be. So whether the intentions were good to begin with or not by some of the people that were part of it, part of advancing it, you know, I think it's some knew and some didn't know. But I really only care about the kids. I want the kids to have the best education possible and to be able to think critically, et cetera, which they also use as a sales pitch, but it isn't true at all. You know, I just want the kids to have a great education, and Common Core isn't part of it.
Now, I've heard it said that Common Core is the federal government taking over the school system. Is that true? Is that false? What are your thoughts on that?
That's a great question. That's a really good question because, you know, the U.S. Constitution would say that that's not allowed. And the people that have wanted to take over the education system for like 100 years have finally succeeded with Common Core and some of the other things. And the way they did that is to have groups that are funded by private organizations. Bill Gates is behind everything related to the takeover of education going on right now, including Common Core. The way they got away with it is to have the private groups funding it, and then the way the federal government was involved was through, I call it the carrot and stick method of governance. You know, they said, well, you can get out of No Child Left Behind requirements if you take this, this Common Core. And they offered some money. Michigan did it and went after it, but got no money actually. So it's really unfortunate. We got the stick and not the carrot. So yeah, there you go. That's how the federal government got involved, by using our tax dollars against us, which seems to be the new thing, not just in education.
Now, I understand the rationale behind Common Core, that, you know, a high school degree from somewhere in Mississippi will be the same standard as a high school degree here in, you know, Michigan. But does that take away the competition between school districts and states that, you know, if you have, I'm a firm believer in competition. And if you have more local control and one community's excelling, maybe it's the Birmingham Bloomfield School District that's excelling, and maybe you have some other school district that isn't, well, that other school district will either try to work harder to get up,
Right.
but if it's the same standard, then there's no incentive to raise the bar.
Right.
Would
You're talking about is a monopoly, which never
Exactly.
which never works. It's been proven again and again and again. So you're exactly right. It's a monopoly and it doesn't work. So if everybody is supposed to perform at this level, right, you've got the higher achievers that are going to come down to meet that, and the sales pitch is that the lower achievers will come up
Right.
to meet that bar.
Right.
You know, the higher achievers may come down, which is very unfortunate for our nation and for those
Absolutely.
kids individually. But, you know, you can't force these kids to come up just by saying, here's what you have to do by this time. Because let's face it, you know, some of them will just leave school and say, forget it, you know, I can't do that. You have to meet the kids where they're at. Everybody is different. Everybody has different abilities. Everybody has different home situations. Everybody advances at different times for different reasons. And it's not a one-size-fits-all education does not work. And it doesn't benefit our nation, our state, or our kids individually. And it's very anti-American.
Now, some will argue that this Common Core will raise the education standard because America has fallen behind many other countries in education. How do you respond to that?
Well, America has fallen behind for many reasons. And not all of America has fallen behind. My kids in the Northville School District, they've graduated now, they're both at U of M, but you know, it's a very high achieving district. You know, if we're going to come down and you know, meet this bar, instead of having other schools learn from what Northville was doing and come up to our bar, then, you know, where does that put us, you know, as a nation? And I'm sorry, what was your question? I don't think I answered you.
Well,
I got off track.
Well, you know, some have argued that Common Core will help America regain its
Right.
prominence in education with competing countries that
Right.
we've fallen below. And
Oh, right. Well, over the past 50 years, going on 51 now, the schools' results have declined in America. Not for all, like I was saying, Northville's higher and some are lower, but generally the decline, the trend is down. What you've seen during the same period is the spending in the trillions has gone up. In other words, the Federal Department of Education was opened. And we just started flooding money into them. So all that money that's going to the Fed Ed, we call it, instead of to the classrooms, is being wasted, and there's no results for it. So the sales pitch for the Fed Ed is we're going to help the poor kids. We're going to help the poor kids, the at-risk kids, which we all want. Everybody wants everybody to do well. I'm not going to argue against that, but it hasn't worked. It hasn't been effective. That money needs to stay in the local schools and not go to Washington and go through all these different, filters and then come back. And then what happens too, you send all that money to the feds, and what do? They attach strings to it. So what happens is you have our money being used against us again, our tax dollars being used against us again. Whereas if we kept it in the local school districts, we could make positive decisions for the people within our local communities. And that's why our U.S. Constitution, gives us local control in education.
yeah, so I'm assuming your position is that in the Constitution, it does not call for the federal government to be involved in local education.
I believe that very strongly, very strongly, that the whole department is against the Constitution. And not only that, but it hasn't helped. So can we please keep our money so that we can actually help our kids in all districts across the nation, instead of having this big bureaucracy soaking up some big dollars and not having any results. In what other industry can you spend trillions of dollars, have negative results, yet we keep going? Not only have we kept going, but No Child Left Behind has been replaced with ESSA, Every Student Succeeds Act. Don't you love these titles? It makes it sound great.
It does.
But if you read these bills, you would be appalled at the things that they're calling for. The data collection, the psychological profiling of our kids, et cetera, and so on. The list is long. ESSA, I recommend you read it and understand it. And the reason that a lot of people signed it in Washington was because they were given a sales pitch, and these bills are so big that people don't have time to read them. I'm not saying that they shouldn't read them. I'm saying they should read them and really understand them. But they're told, it gives more control back to the states and the local districts. So that's not true at all. In fact, the federal government gets to approve what we're doing in each state. So it's actually more burdensome. And the psychological profiling is something that the Truth in American Education is really fighting big time.
Now, you mentioned the data collection. Can you give examples of some of the things that is going to be collected by the government?
Well, the Common Core contract included requirements for data collection in Michigan. I have the contract, I put it out on a site that I maintain, a Facebook page, because people, a lot of times they're like, well, that can't be true. Well, it's very true. There's 400 data points. In fact, we've printed out the data points that they collect, and we've put it in, we've laminated it so that we can take it to meetings and show people the list. So we bring out this big list, and it goes on and on and on. It's really super long. But there's things in there like, if there's a psychological profiling of the child, which it calls for in ESSA, all that data is collected and sent up to the federal level. And, a lot of people have access to it. It doesn't stay in the local, it would be one thing if it stayed in the local school district and teachers used it and administrators used it to help that kid. But it goes into your permanent, record. Of course your grades and all that stuff, but, sexual preferences, your parents, where do they work? Where do they go to school? What are their political preferences? Just all sorts of unbelievable data points, and there's so many I couldn't even go over them all.
So the government's asking what the political philosophy is of the parents?
Yes.
What rationale is that for the education of the student?
It has nothing to do with the education of the student. Like I said, there's a global education agenda going on, and it really has nothing to do with the education of the student.
That's pretty scary.
It's very scary.
That the government wants to be so intrusive on that.
Yeah, and you know, every day that we wake up, it's a new day. We have a chance to do better, and it's a God-given thing. You know, the grace of God. Every day we wake up and we have a new day, a day to be better. But you know, if you have a list of everything you've ever done and everything you've done wrong, everything you've done right, everything your parents and you think, et cetera, and so on, you've got this big list that's always following you. It's always in your backpack. It's on your back, weighing you down. It's like, how can every day be a new day for us? We really need to cancel this data collection effort. The data collection a school should be very limited. You know, your grades, and I personally feel it should stay within the local district. Your grades, you know, your test scores, things that directly affect what you're doing in the schools. They're expanding all sorts of things in schools across the nation, expanding the hours, you know, adding health centers in there. You know, parents really need to watch what's going on and make the best decision for their kids and their families.
Now, I've heard that some of this data is sold to private industry. Is that correct, or am I mistaken on that?
Well, Obama changed the privacy rules so that anybody with an educational interest can have access to some data on our kids. And, you know, it's really scary. So yes, there are private organizations that are getting access to this data. And not only that, but hackers are accessing this data constantly, and we don't even know who's getting access to this data. So China may know what your kids have a big list of, you know, stuff that your kids have done, and who knows who will use what for what. But I know the IRS is targeting conservative groups, so who knows, you know, what's going to happen with this data. And I'm sure the IRS has access to all of it. So, you know, once they know your political affiliation, will they be auditing you? You know what I mean?
Right.
So.
Yeah. Now, earlier you mentioned Bill Gates. Is he kind of the architect of all this and funding it?
He's the sugar daddy. I call him the sugar daddy. He's behind absolutely everything. So we have created charts that show all the tentacles of what's going on in education, and then all the organizations behind them. And every door you knock on and every curtain you look under, you will see Bill Gates funding. It's unbelievable that this guy is basically funding an education takeover. This one guy. It's really, really unbelievable.
Do you have any idea how much he's put into this?
Well, there's a lot of different estimates, but it's definitely in the billions, if not trillions.
Wow.
And he's admitted that, you know, it's not working, but instead of pulling back, he's going in hard.
Doubling down.
Doubling down, yeah, absolutely. You know, Bill Gates loves the UN. He has Microsoft has a contract with UNESCO, the UN Education Group. And, you know, there's a lot there. I'm all for the sovereignty of our nation, and I don't want to be under global control or UN control or anything like that. So you really got to be concerned with the guy that's funding all this stuff. You know, that he's really very pro-UN, and he has interests in connecting all the different nations in education, one education, one world. You know, using the computers, which he makes, right? So he makes a ton of money off.
So, do you think he also has a profit motive, that by creating these standards, that Microsoft will get involved and be able to market their products to the school systems?
What do you think? I'm a CPA, you're a CPA. Cha-ching! Absolutely.
Well,
absolutely.
yes, I mean, I'm
yeah.
connecting the dots there.
Right, exactly. He stands to make a ton of money. In fact, everybody that you look under the curtain and see where the funding is coming from, has a profit motive. And they like to say, oh, I want what's best for the kids and everything, but we haven't seen what's best for the kids. In fact, the testing that's related to Common Core is not proven and it's not reliable. What are two things you need to have a test that's actually helpful? It has to be proven and it has to be reliable.
Mm-hmm.
The tests in Michigan, for example, not proven, not reliable. The scores are all over the board. And what do? After the kids take the test, then they set the cut score. Wait a minute. You're determining afterwards whether I'm good or, meeting or exceeding expectations. They're moving the bar because they have to, because the tests aren't proven and they're not reliable. It's really, really, really a sad situation. I rejected the test for my kids. I didn't allow the schools to give it to my kids. There's an opt-out movement all over the nation.
Would homeschooling be an alternative to this, or do these standards affect the homeschooling movement also?
Right now, a lot of states have very good laws regarding homeschooling where you're not under the government control. Michigan is very good in that regard. So I highly recommend homeschooling, very highly recommend it, or a classical education academy if you can afford private schools. The thing is, as the books change, as Common Core gets into all the books, which there's a huge profit motive there, for these books, it gets to be in all the materials. So as a homeschooler, you have to dig for the right materials. You have to be very discerning in what materials you're using. So it can be done, and a lot more people are doing it. As this goes on, there's way more homeschoolers in our nation.
Now, you mentioned school books. I've heard one of the arguments for Common Core is that these school books can be, rather than being printed for, maybe one state or something, by nationalizing the school system, you're producing many times over the same school book that's going to all 50 states. So whatever's in that school book is now kind of like the Bible, and you're not
Right.
having alternative
Right.
takes on.
Right, and the schools are really at the mercy a lot of times of the school books because they're not making them, right? The school book companies are making them.
Right.
And another thing going on is people getting on the boards of these school book companies, they have their own motives, right? So one of the things that's happening, and it's been happening for a while, is there's Muslims getting onto these boards and these companies that are running these school books. So they're putting a very pro-Muslim slant in the books. Like I said, I just want the truth taught to the kids, and if there's opinions to be had, I want all the opinions given to the kids so that they can think critically. And I think that that's academic integrity too when you present things these ways. But you'll notice a very big trend towards pro-Muslim, anti-Christian things in the books. And there's also advanced placement courses are used across the nation in high schools. It allows kids to get college credit, so it's really nice if they do well on the test at the end of the year. It's a very great example of what you're talking about. So David Coleman is the head of College Board that runs the AP program. He was an architect of Common Core. So he got all this Common Core going, and then he got into this position in College Board, and he's changing all the AP courses. And he's very liberal, and so he's changing like AP U.S. History, for example. You can't even recognize it for U.S. History because they spend the first third of the year talking about how America hates blacks and American Native Indians, and the rest of the time, that's the foundation that they're using in presenting America. So again, I want the truth taught, the good things, the bad things. in American history. But it's a very negative presentation of our history. And I don't think it's fair. I don't think it's balanced. I don't think it's accurate. I asked my school district to stop using it until they put it back to a more accurate representation of our nation, so our kids don't grow up hating America and going to fight for ISIS. And they says, well, we'll let the kids decide. Well, since when do the kids get to decide what's taught in the classrooms? It's the school administration that's supposed to be doing that. Right. So the AP is a perfect example of a national curriculum.
Okay. I want to get to this one point before we run out of time.
Okay.
I found it very interesting. You were involved in writing a bill, or you wrote a bill with...
Yeah, there's a bill that I and a couple other people spent over a year writing, and Gary Glenn is the sponsor in the Michigan House of that bill. And it is the strongest bill in the nation for education to get us out of Common Core and the related testing and the related federal intrusion and the related data collection and these things. It's extremely strong, and the reason I say it's extremely strong is because we spent a year watching what was going on in other states. They kept trying to get out of Common Core, and it ended up being like a fake repeal. So we selected the wording very carefully to give Michigan the strongest bill in the nation, and to give our kids excellence in education. And what we did was we pulled the strongest standards and tests that were proven over a long period of time, and we said, let's use this for 5 years. That gives us a chance to, to get out of the Common Core machine. Let's use this, and that's not just math and ELA, but science and social studies as well. Let's get Michigan back on track to excellence, and let's use the best, and let's get rid of all this other stuff, the data collection and all this. And it was picked up on the Senate side by Colbeck, and it passed the Senate Education Committee very quickly, and then it has stalled. So we really need people to push their state reps and state senators to get this bill passed. House Bill 5444, Senate Bill 826.
Okay, so those out watching, you have those, what are those bill numbers again?
Senate Bill 826 and House Bill 5444.
Okay, so I encourage people to read up on the bill and call your state senator and state rep and express your opinion on this issue. So we're just about out of time here. Is there anything else that you'd like to mention about our educational system?
Well, there's a lot going on. There's a lot I could say, but I guess the best advice that I have is for parents to really, understand what's going on in the classroom. And sometimes it's hard to do the right thing by your kids, but you really got to get in there, understand what's going on, and make the best decision for your family. One of the biggest things that's bothering people now is the LGBTQ agenda that has passed at the federal level and now in Michigan as well. And local districts can adopt or don't have to adopt. So if you're not interested in boys using the girls' bathrooms and locker rooms and boys being on the girls' sports teams and these kinds of things, then you really need to tell your local districts that you're not going to do that. In fact, I would say tell them you're going to pull your kid out if they do adopt that, because if parents don't start to put their foot down and pull their kids out, the school districts are going to keep pushing their agenda, which a lot of people don't believe in. So we don't believe in that liberal agenda. So it's important that you know what's going on, and if you don't like what you see, pull them out. Okay, and on that note, I want to thank you very much, Tami, for being my guest today, and hopefully we'll be talking soon. Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it. Thank you, Tami.